Welcome back. I'm in the studio with Pauli Van Wyk of the Daily Maverick's investigative Scorpio team, and we are discussing the shenanigans at SARS, and of course some of the information being in the public domain coming out from the Nugent Commission. Now, Mr. Moyane himself feels hard done by yourself, by Mr. Pravin Gordhan, and including the president. Somehow he regards this as personal against himself, most recently saying that he is the best performing commissioner at SARS. What's your view?
He's very thin-skinned. But let's unpack that. He argues that he is the first commissioner that breached the 1 trillion rand threshold.
Yeah.
Now, from the numbers, if you analyze the tax numbers, it's clear that SARS in around 2014, 2015 breached that threshold despite Mr. Moyane, not because of him. Because Mr. Moyane, as we said, came into SARS at September 2014. The tax year ends by February. No commissioner, no matter who you are, can claim a victory like that in only 5 to 6 months. So that is totally impossible. And then the second important point there is that SARS's target was anyway above 1 trillion. They should have and must have made it, no matter what Mr. Moyane would have done at the time.
But now, what is it that you think Mr. Moyane is failing to understand here? You think he's failing to understand anything, or he knows what's going on?
Mr. Moyane knows exactly what's going on. He's trying to shield his own culpability and trying to shield what he has done, because the Commission of Inquiry into SARS has unearthed facts that we never knew before. I wrote a lot about how Mr. Moyane SARS paid 420 million rand in VAT, for example, to the Gupta companies, and how illegal that was, and how it changed SARS from the inside. But this story about Bain and how Mr. Moyane was coached to take up the job, and how they colluded to give Bain the tender to review or redesign the operation model. This is new information that is actually only coming out now.
And when you say that, I mean, it's almost like, since we refer to these things as state capture, that are you suggesting, on the basis of the information at your disposal and the reports that you have written, that Bain, the company, colluded in state capture?
Yes, absolutely. I don't think you can interpret it in any other way.
And that Bain, the company, colluded in the capture of SARS, or
yes,
the undermining or dismantling of the institution?
Yes. What happened is that Bain, Mr. Vittorio Mazzoni of Bain, met with Mr. Moyane and Mr. Jonas Makwakwa a lot of times, but a long time before Mr. Moyane would have even been appointed. And they already, at that stage, started discussing the tender that Bain would get. And it was a tender that was not yet conceptualized inside SARS.
So Bain got the tender?
Yes.
And they were paid how much for that?
187 million rand.
Okay, and the first thing that Mr. Moyane, according to your information and what is coming out, is that the attack was against the investigative unit?
Yes, the internal investigative unit, certain individuals inside SARS, and then the investigative units that looked at delinquent taxpayers. And may I say, this is not things that we hear from sources, from people. This is documents that cannot be interpreted in any other way. We're not guessing, we know this. Now,
the media, the Sunday Times specifically, how do they get involved there, the journalists who reported on the rogue unit, as it was referred to then?
I think only the Sunday Times journalists will really know the inside story of exactly how they were duped into the story. But what we could see from the outside is that Sunday Times had a certain narrative they were fed with. And we knew that it came from people like Mr. Luther Lubello in the HR department of SARS, and other people inside, like really the real rogues in SARS. Who fed Sunday Times with information, and then Mr. Moyane and SARS would officially act on the same information that they leaked to the Sunday Times.
Okay, and say, the Sunday Times is saying 1, 2, 3, on the basis of that, we're taking action against you. Now, your personal experience of covering this type of story, because, we've had threats being made against journalists who are getting too close to the true information. What has your personal experience been covering the story?
Well, it was difficult from the start, and it will always be difficult. I think the most important thing is how the whistleblowers were treated. And in the end, that is the real crippling part, is how the whistleblowers get threatened, sometimes at the pain of their lives or their children's lives or their work. So whenever a whistleblower would be perceived as working with us or giving us information, they would be targeted. And many people did leave SARS, and some were moved out of their jobs, and some were investigated. It was a very hard time.
And so it was apparent, at least to those whistleblowers, that the powers that be within SARS were aware that there were whistleblowers and who those whistleblowers were, and they were targeted in the process.
Yes.
So how has this cost the country? I mean, individuals have paid, as you say, you know, the members of that investigative unit, the whistleblowers, and maybe other people who resisted instructions that said they should undermine the institution. But how do you think South Africa has paid or is paying for what happened there?
Sure, it's unfathomable. The amount of money, I'm not sure that we can quantify it, because you have to look at the targets that we missed, and then we're sitting already at 150 billion over 3 years. Then you have to also think about the money that you missed, and that is not so easily quantifiable. So if you look at the gangster down in Cape Town, Mr. Mark Liffman, he owes SARS 400 million, but it might be way more now because there are penalties and things. So that money was never collected. Same with Mr. Robert Huang down in Durban. He owes SARS around 3 billion rand, but that can also be more
3
now.
billion?
Yes, 3 billion. So, and that has also not been collected. And so...
And you're talking about this because it's something that's known to SARS, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
it's their own investigations, and it's something that I wrote about a lot, and something that my whistleblowers were targeted for when I wrote about it. So just to come back to your question, is that it's very, very difficult to quantify exactly what we missed out on, because we don't know. For the Guptas, for example, the Guptas were never investigated by SARS. There were 2 projects that were launched and was never taken further, because then Mr. Muyani entered SARS. The Zumas the same. The Zumas were never really targeted, and
when you say the Zumas, who do you mean? I mean,
Mr. Zuma,
the
himself,
president, that is, yeah?
Yes. And then Edward Zuma, who was working with the tobacco institutions or the tobacco barons in KwaZulu-Natal, Mr. Zuma's wives, and their NGOs, and their friends, and their kids. So it's a vast network.
And you estimate the losses to be how much? I mean, we've spoken about the human suffering and the loss of jobs and so forth, but in terms of the capital that the country should have collected, or SARS should have collected.
Just to add to that previous point, there are people that still can't get work for 3 or 2 years consecutive, and that you can also not quantify.
Yeah.
But if we look at the capital that we lost, it's difficult to say, but I would say just from SARS it might be around 200 billion rand. 200
billion rands. And would you link the VAT increase to what happened at SARS, would you?
Absolutely, yes. Because now we're not, so it's not the only factor, but it's definitely a contributing factor. So if you look at the whole VAT situation, the Fees Must Fall program, and a difficult economy, and the fact that SARS did not collect what it should have. It didn't make target, it wasn't able to make target because of Mr. Muyani and the changes in SARS. All of that contributed to the increase in VAT.
So where and how do you think this is going to end? Where is it going in terms of the commission, and how do you think it's going to end?
This Commission of Inquiry into SARS is doing astoundingly good work. I have absolute faith in them. So what they should do now by the end of November is to recommend certain action to Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa. He must act on that. And this Commission, we must remember, cannot find that someone is guilty of a crime and send them to jail. That won't happen. But what they will say is that the Hawks must investigate this because there's a prima facie case of, let's say, money laundering or whatever. So they will also refer certain cases to the Hawks or the Public Protector or the SIU or some cases to be investigated, and they will tell or recommend for Mr. Ramaphosa how SARS should be changed and corrected.
And the current leadership at SARS, what kind of work are they doing to restore the public's faith and confidence in the system? Because I would like to believe that where taxes are involved, it's very key that there should be trust in the system, right? When you mentioned
Absolutely.
420 million rands tax payback to the Guptas, that will get a lot of people's blood to boil, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mr. Mark Kingan was appointed as the acting commissioner on 19 March when Mr. Muyani was suspended by Mr. Ramaphosa. So Mr. Kingan immediately tried to re-establish some of the investigative capacity, and in Mr. Muyani's time still, they realized that they made a big mistake by disbanding the large business center. So they tried to start re-establishing that, and that process is going quicker and wider now at the moment. And those two are key. It's very important that the enforcement capacity gets rebuilt and the large business center too. The large business center is the backbone of SARS's collection capability. And then there are certain reporting lines and things that is also busy correcting. But the most important thing that we don't really see at the moment is people who know the business of SARS and who knows tax must be in managing positions, and we don't see
very
that
quick
yet.
question, and briefly from your side. Is this the last we've had of the shenanigans within SARS, or is there still more to come, to be uncovered?
Definitely, yeah.
You reckon?
Yes, well, I for once is working on 2 stories in the next 2 weeks, that big revelations regarding Bain specifically.
Okay.
And then we'll hear more about the Guptas, more about the VAT, and I'm sure other journalists are also working on things.
Well,
and the Commission also uncovered a lot.
You're a brave woman. And of course, as I said, doggedly working on the story for 4 years. Thank you very much, Pauli, for coming through and simplifying it for us. But you've written many articles over that period of time. Thanks, and keep up the good work.
Thanks, Tim.
That's Pauli Van Wyk, who works for the Daily Maverick, and she has written extensively on the SARS matters for 4 years, as you heard. After the break, we'll be turning our focus to higher education and training and discussing 4th Industrial Revolution and checking whether South Africa is ready for that. Buti Manamela is the Deputy Minister. He will be talking to us.